welcome to the School Debate, What You Need to Know. I'm Teixeira, coming to you from the SMAC studios, where we're diving into the most talked about topic in Stoughton, the future of our elementary schools. With the closing of the South Elementary School, our community is facing big decisions about the best path forward. There are plenty of questions, concerns, and yes, debates about what that means for our students, families, and taxpayers. To help us break down the finances of this project, I'm joined today by two key voices in the conversation. Dr. Jess Miner, Vice Chair of the Elementary School Building Independent Working Group, and Stoughton Town Manager Tom Calter. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. Jess, we'll get started with you.
Okay.
So you served as the Vice Chair on the Independent Working Group that was put together by the Town Manager. What compelled you to not only join, but then even step up more and serve as the Vice Chair?
So thank you for having me here. I care a lot about the town. I've volunteered on a number of committees over the years since I moved here in 2015. And I care deeply about public education. So this issue was particularly compelling for me. But I would say I got involved at the level I did on this committee because I honestly didn't feel super informed myself as a voter, even though I had been tracking the school issue the whole time, and I'm a town meeting rep and all of that. And then I was shocked by how polarizing this particular issue was. So as someone who works in civil disagreement and ethics education, I thought it would be an opportunity to step up and serve and offer my services in that regard. But I decided to vice chair primarily because when I went to the first meeting, I learned that John Ansavino was chairing. I like to joke that he put me on the spot, so I didn't have a choice. But I had worked with him on the Finance Committee for 6 years, and so that was a reason for me to work with him. But the town manager had put together this group, and I was very compelled by the fact that he said explicitly he was collecting people who voted on all sides of the issue, who had a number of different reasons that they voted the way they did, and he wanted to be sure all of the opinions were represented in the work we produced. So, John and I thought it was important to think about how we presented this information, to think about it from the perspective of the voters, what kinds of answers we could put out there to help people get their questions resolved when the vote came up again, if it did, and we wanted to make sure that people felt really knowledgeable and informed and that a lot of different voices were heard through the process. So that's why I decided to vice chair.
Awesome, thank you. So as you know, our slogan for our campaign is pay less, vote yes. The working group presented its findings, and as part of the findings, you looked at so many different options, and then also the costs associated with them.
Yep.
Can you briefly tell us why it's better and cheaper to build a new school?
So the first thing I guess I would say on the costs, it was very important for us to recognize that this new structure would be a 50-year structure and that the cost would be split between the state and the Stoughton taxpayers. So the fact that Stoughton taxpayers would pay $66 million about, and the state would cover $47 million, that was really important to recognize, because we get a new consolidated building that would last 50 years, and the Stoughton taxpayer would be responsible for only a portion of that. I think, we looked at over a dozen options, and this is the only option that the state offered to cover a percentage of.
Oh, right.
And so, the other options that we considered, the base repair to the South School and ad reno, those were not true options. It would cost more than the $66 million to do those. So that nobody thought that was a good idea. Not on our group, not on the nose, no one. Everybody agreed that was a terrible idea. And there were other options put out there, but they weren't going to be subsidized by the state. So I think this, for a new school option, this was absolutely the best and cheapest option that was on the table. We tried to investigate whether there were other cheaper new school options, but that's where the other factors come in, overcrowding. This was also not just the cheapest option in new construction, but it was the best solution in terms of solving multiple problems at once, according to the working group's assessment of the situation. So, we are talking about a consolidated school that would serve 600 students instead of a small school that might serve maybe 200 or 300. And we're talking about shutting down 2 schools and having only one. So, and shutting down the older schools that cost a ton to maintain and repair. So when you consolidate, you have fewer staffing needs. You have a lot less maintenance going on. And I think, just the transportation costs even now are expensive. So this would allow us to, I think, minimize, and the town manager can correct me if I'm wrong, but would allow us to solve a lot of those problems in the most economical way we have, given the problem that the town faces. And this is a complex problem.
Great, thank you. Tom,
Yes.
over to you. Let's go back a little bit to move forward. Can you walk us through exactly what a bond rating is and how that impacts the cost of this project?
Megan, I'd be happy to. But first of all, I would like to tell you just how honored I was that Jess and John Anzavino would lead this working group effort. All of the folks on the team did an extraordinary independent analysis, and that is what our citizens need to pay attention to. And so thank you, Jess, for your leadership, and thank you, John. Nobody would have ever accused John and I of being dear friends. We've debated heavily for several years now, but nobody will question John and Jess's commitment to the truth and to their ability to do detailed analysis. Now, the bond rating is something that's not talked about enough, and it's very important. The 2 largest bond agency firms are Moody's and Standard & Poor's. We all have mortgages, and you had to go through underwriting, and they looked at your credit score. Moody's and Standard & Poor's does that in the public sector. So they look at the town's financials, which Stoughton's town financials are extraordinarily strong, particularly compared to others during these difficult times. And they look at policies, procedures, best practices, and staff. And Moody's came in to see us 2 weeks ago. They are absolutely wowed by the level of reserves we've built, the savings accounts we've built. We are in line for potential bond rating increase. Now, why is that important? The bond rating is a measurement of risk. As we sell bonds to the investor market, municipal bonds, they look at Moody's rating and analysis and Standard & Poor's. And they clearly said 3 months ago that it's the conservative budgeting approach of the town of Stoughton that makes the investment safe. The safer the investment, the higher the bond rating. The higher the bond rating, the lower our cost of borrowing. It could be tens of millions of dollars with 1 percentage point. And so that's why it was so important over the past 2 or 3 years to put our financial house in order. We hired a forensic accountant, Elizabeth, who runs our department, 2 very experienced municipal managers, and we stand, according to the bond agencies, almost alone on southeastern Massachusetts in our financial condition right now. So the bond agency is much like the underwriter when you apply for your mortgage or you buy a car. If you have a good credit score, you pay a lower interest rate on your car. If you have high credit score, the other way around. A low credit score, you pay a higher amount.
Right. Well, so you've said on this very stage that we're in great financial shape. So can you talk to about how we can't afford this? We hear that a lot.
We can certainly afford it. And in fact, we can't afford not to do it. The alternative is so much more money. Your slogan of pay less, vote yes is brilliant because it's true. And in this day and age, truth sells because the opposite has been true for so long.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, not only can we afford it, we can't afford not to do it. The alternatives cost more. And if anybody wants detail on that, above and beyond what the working group published, feel free to walk into my office and we'll lay it out for you.
Can you talk a little bit to some of the things that have come out recently from the select board on other ways the town could pay down this project?
Yes, I'd love to. We're expecting any week now the final payment, believe it or not, on the high school project. And that was done with a debt exclusion. Therefore, we can use that money for a like project, like the South School project. So that is approximately $2 million. The board has voted to dedicate that to the school project. There's an additional $1.4 million that has of closed articles. And that's part of our finance team's cleanup of old articles that were not spent or were charged to different accounts. That $1.4 million will be freed up, and the board has passed a resolution, non-binding because they can't commit future boards to this, but a resolution that says that this $1.4 million should go to this school project once it goes through the general fund. And finally, and probably the biggest resolution the board passed, is they resolved to future boards that when the two schools, the South and the Jones, are turned over to the care, custody, and control of the select board, their very intent is to sell those buildings as is, not tear them down, and to designate the future use, because townspeople have an influence and should have a voice in what those sites are used for. And best estimates as provided to us from independent realtors is between the two of them will receive another $4 to $8 million, which the resolutions resolves that money should go to the school project. And so I've read on Facebook how people talk about, where'd all this found money come? Again, we're having, boy, I wish I had the date with me, a budget information session the third week of April. I think it's April 28th, but it's posted on my website. Anyone who's got any questions like that, I would really hope that they would come, ask them in public. It's going to be covered by SMAC. We are an open book, and we can't and we won't spend a dime without town meeting approval. That is our legislative body. We only make proposals. It's the select board, the finance committee, but most importantly, the legislative body that makes the final decisions. And because of those control systems, our bond rating is at a very high and soon to be higher because of our financial conditions.
Great. Jess, back over to you. Dr. Baeta has shared that if this vote doesn't pass and we don't build a new school, the South School will close and the modulars will be added to the remaining elementary schools to accommodate all of the students. Did the working group look into that and look into the financials around the modulars?
Yes, we did take a look at this again once we sort of uncovered the degree to which this was a whole town-wide issue and not just a South School simple close the old South and replace it with a new building, which I think a lot of people we talked to thought was the case at the beginning of this. So once we realized there were going to be, modulars all over and that was going to be a cost we had to factor in, we looked at that and we came up with a figure of about $22 to $30 million for adding modulars at the time for just 3 of the 4 elementary schools. But the understanding is now it would be at all 4 elementary schools. So I'm assuming we're talking closer to 30 to 40 million just in modular costs alone.
With a 10-year life.
With a 10-year life, exactly. And so I think, again, I don't want to misrepresent. What we learned was that people even, whether they were, in favor of this project or against it, nobody thought modulars was a good idea. So I just want to point out that we're facing the option as a town that no one I talked to, no one we heard from, a lot of public voices, nobody thinks this is a good idea. Everybody thinks modulars is a waste of money, and it really is. You're talking a 10-year fix. We're going to spend nearly the same amount to do that, and then we don't even have a new school that's going to last 50 years. We have none of the energy efficiencies. We have none of the consolidation. It's just a complete waste of money. And you hear all the time, this town cannot keep kicking the can. That is exactly what this would be doing. So I urge people to learn a little more about the issue with the modulars. I know Dr. Baeta has put a short video out there on that, and it's not a good solution.
So, Tom, if the vote fails and we have to move forward with paying for these modulars, how would the town go about paying for that?
Well, we would have to, it's a great question. We'd have to borrow the money. We don't have $30 million or the debt service to pay for $30 million inside the current levy. So we'd have to borrow money. And it's short-term borrowing because the life expectancy of the modules are 30 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Excuse me, 10 years. And if it fails, if the petition fails, our children lose out on a first-class environment to be educated. Now, I was a member of the school committee. I was a member of the finance committee in my hometown, so I see both sides of it. This is both a financial win if it passes, and it's an educational win. It's also a real estate win. So if it fails, our children lose out. There's no question. If it fails, we lose approximately $48 million in funding. That's disastrous for a town like ours. It's disastrous. You could say period, dead stop right there. It's disastrous, putting aside the social cost. But I'd like to raise a couple of other issues. To our taxpayers that my friend Lisa Lyons thinks she's the sole representative. If this fails and our taxpayers pay for modules or more money for 2 smaller community schools, which is more expensive, then our real estate values will plummet, particularly with the modules.
Yeah.
And if our real estate values plummet, how does that help people where their largest asset is their home? Let's take the trailers, for example. If that is the outcome, and I don't see any other plan on the drawing board, if that's the outcome, if you're a young mom and dad moving to a town, would you move to a town that educates their children in mobile homes, in trailers? Of course not. So if there's no demand for Stoughton houses, real estate values plummet. So we talk about $200 a year for the debt exclusion. Take that over 5 years, and you've got a young couple that wants to buy a new house or a senior that wants to downsize. They're probably going to take a 20% hit on their value because young parents are not bringing their children to get educated in Stoughton trailers. To me, this yes vote is so critical to the next decade or longer for Stoughton. It is, this project as presented, as designed, as built, is cheaper than both alternatives, the trailers and the 2 smaller cinder block schools, which I still haven't seen a plan that they all keep talking about. It's, for those that just want to keep their taxes down, yes is your choice. For those that want to have a world-class education, which Stoughton deserves, your vote is yes. I don't see, and Jess, I would ask you, do you see any better alternative? I'm sorry, you're the interviewer.
That was my last question, and for you, Jess, was give you the last word. As a Stoughton resident, why should people vote yes?
And you've got 9 minutes.
No, I want to quickly speak to the social cost that you mentioned in addition to this sort of investment in our community long term, because we're talking about putting modulars on the playground spaces. We're talking about sending kids to lunch at 9 a.m. if we have to do this. I agree with you that people are not going to move here, and I think you'll see people moving out. And I'm not trying to peddle, some kind of rhetoric that would scare people. But I think people need to understand the real consequences of this vote. And again, that's why we didn't continue calling ourselves the South School Independent Working Group. We changed the name to the Elementary School Building Independent Working Group because this is an issue that affects all of the elementary schools and the entire town. Now, I actually appreciate the very real financial strain people are facing, and I know we have that as something that we're all dealing with right now. And our seniors are struggling, and our taxpayers feel like they're at the limit. I think we all can agree to that. That is real. I think there's also the real issue of Wilkins being a star school and having to not serve as an elementary school anymore. But this frees the Wilkins up to be a preschool in the neighborhood, and that is an important addition to our community environment instead of a detraction. So I think those are some positives that came of this. I think the fact that the town has agreed now to sell off the Old South building and the Jones, hopefully, at some point, once it's designated, to recoup some of these, the 4 to 8 million you mentioned, to put toward the cost and further reduce from the 66 million. When you talk about the efficiencies and you talk about environmental incentives that still exist, and you talk about this and the 2 million we're bringing the point is we're bringing the number down to make it financially feasible for everybody. And I think those are all really important things to do. So I really don't, I would encourage the community to think hard about this vote. It's super important to get out there and vote. Our goal as an independent working group was to just put the information out there in a Q&A format. So we had lots of questions, we heard lots of questions, everything is framed. What's your question? You can find it, look at our report, and you only have to spend 1 minute on it. I vice chaired with John so that it was a 10-page report. And so you'll find your answer, and you can ask me too if you have further questions. But the financial strain is real, and I'll just say that I think we have great schools right now. I have had my kids here since Gibbons. I have one off to college now, and he is crushing it at a really competitive school. He's doing amazing. He's really well prepared. The other one's in high school now. And public education is super important. So as somebody who put my kids through the Stoughton schools, and I came here, I moved here with kids in elementary school, and I looked for a town where I was like, what's a good place with a diverse community where the schools are good and I can send my kids to public education? Because it saved me. I wanted to do that. And they went here, and I've got one off in college, and he's doing great. And my other one's in the theater program, and they're going to finals. And it's just I think there's a reason for us to invest in this. And I know that if I had the same decision to make 10 years later, and I was going to put my kids in a trailer here, I wouldn't have moved here. So I just encourage everybody to look at the information, and please to ask any questions. This is about sharing information and making the best decision that we can for a town to solve a common problem. And please vote on April 8th.
Great. Any final thoughts, Tom?
I really do it. I'd like to share them. When I came here 2.5 years ago, quite honestly, I had studied the financials inside and out at the time. And I thought, without knowing very much at all, we cannot afford a big school. And then in my first week, I toured the South and the Jones with the superintendent. And I was mortified by the condition. This project should have happened 15 to 20 years ago, and it didn't. And some of those same people that are opposed to it now were the people that were opposed to it 15 and 20 years ago and took votes, public votes on that issue. And here we are now. The high school is a 20-year note. The town had the courage to take that vote, and before we know it, that note will be paid off. And that is vision. That's forward thinkingness. By my third week here, I learned about MSBA contribution, and I was involved with building 2 schools in Kingston, so I'm very familiar with MSBA. And I saw their offer of almost $48 million. And then I began to look at our own bond rating and our cost of borrowing and the impact on taxpayers. And I'm so happy that Jess raised the point about the current burden on taxpayers. It's real. Yeah. It's real. And I get it. And we do everything we can to reach out to seniors to get them all the state funding that they're due. And we'll continue to do that regardless of which way this goes. But what I will say is I'm disappointed with the level of division, vitriol, and misinformation. I want to thank your group and all the ladies that are contributing their time and their talents to bring out the truth. And the work that the working group did is just extraordinary. And as Jess mentioned earlier, we invited several people that demonstrated both publicly or by their town meeting votes their opposition to this project. And we had a couple of people on the working group in the end who voted in favor of the report. We also had several that refused to serve. Yeah. And you can speculate as to why. I love this town. I've been here 2.5 years. However, I am somewhat disappointed by some of the leaders of the No Group. Not because of their opinion. They're entitled to their opinion. I think it was Abe Lincoln who said, "Sir, you can draw your own conclusion, but you can't make up your own facts. And that's what they've done. And that's divided this town. And I'm very sorry for that. I'm very sorry for that. I am a fiscal conservative. And I'm telling everybody that will listen, this investment is the only prudent investment before us right now. It's great for the town. It's great for our children. It'll give the seniors a better return on their investment in real estate. It'll make it safer for our police department because it's designed to deal with an intruder safely. Now you can have the first officer with this design run into a meeting with an intruder, run into a building with an intruder, and have a good chance of surviving. And the intruder has a bad chance of surviving because of the design. So whether it's our taxpayers, whether it's our law enforcement, whether it's our seniors, our EMS, but most importantly, our children, this project checks every single box. And again, if anybody wants greater detail, I'm happy to provide it. And facts are friendly. There's not good facts or bad facts. There are just facts. Please vote yes on this question, and let's get going for the good of Stoughton.
Wonderful. That really highlights the significance of this project and the lasting impact it will have on our town. Thank you guys both for sharing your insights on all this. It's been great to have Jess and Tom with us here today. Your dedication to informing the community has been invaluable, and your efforts to communicate this out have been truly heroic. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
To everyone watching, remember to stay informed by visiting voteyesstoughton.com, and most importantly, pay less, vote yes on April 8th. Thanks for tuning in to the school debate, What You Need to Know. We'll see you at the polls.